Hi everyone, RedneckComputerGeek here. I figured for 50,000 subscriber mark we'd do something a little bit different than I see on most YouTube channels. And that's the fact I'd like to go and tell you about who I am and a little bit of backstory about myself and things like that. I get a lot of emails from you guys now that I've released the mainmudmower@yahoo.com email address. And a lot of you talk with me about how you like my videos because I make it feel like they're there and that you understand how I am and things like that. And I wanted to share a little bit about myself and my past and some things that you guys might find interesting or, I don't know, maybe motivational or something like that. One of the first things that everybody always asks me about is what's up with the rubber gloves? And the answer is when I was a really young kid, I ended up as what a lot of people jokingly refer to as a bubble boy. And basically a bubble boy is when you have such an issue with your health and your immune system or your allergies that they put you inside of a plastic box for a time while they're trying to go and figure out what's going on with you. And for me, that's my allergies. I'm actually allergic to many, many things. And the reason why the gloves all the time is because I'm allergic to automatic transmission fluid. It makes me break out in massive pimples and hives. I'm allergic to Kevlar. It makes me break out into hives and causes my skin to look like crocodile and end up falling off. I'm also allergic to a bunch of different artificial stuff. Artificial banana makes me talk like Darth Vader out of Star Wars. I'm allergic to artificial strawberry. It actually will cause my throat to seize up, and I end up having breathing issues and sneeze blood. I'm asthmatic as well, so that really doesn't help with the situation. I'm allergic to peanuts, hazelnuts, almost everything along those lines I'm allergic to. I'm also allergic to avocados. I can't have a lot of different Mexican dishes. Avocados actually cause me to have major breathing issues and pass out from it and stuff like that. So unfortunately, I have grown up always being the guy that was allergic to everything at the parties. When I was much younger, I used to go to a birthday party and my parents would actually pack me safe for me to eat food, and that really made me stand out, strange person at the party. So I just wanted to go and clean the shop, tell you guys a couple of stories along the way. I watch another YouTuber called 3D Machines, and I really enjoy his way that he talks and vlogs, and he's usually cleaning the shop when he tells stories, and I can understand where that comes from. It makes me comfortable as well when I'm talking with somebody. When I'm having major conversations with my kids, a lot of times I will be cleaning the shop because it kind of sidetracks your brain while you're doing it. So I'm just going to be moving along and doing stuff, and as I find stuff, maybe I'll tell you guys some stories of my youth. One of the other things that you guys always point out is that when I'm using the welder, a lot of times I don't end up using gloves. Like, I have them here, I just never seem to use them. And the reason for that is actually I was very active in sports when I was younger in middle school. I was one of the top wrestlers in my weight class. In sixth grade and seventh grade, I was top in the state and everything in my weight class. And my last year of wrestling in eighth grade, I went into states and I was very high in the ranking. And during one of my competitions, my opponent put me in a behind the back cradle hold, which is illegal if you do wrestling, and there's a reason why it's illegal. And he torqued up on me and could not manage to pin me. I just was able to arch my back out of it. And so he grabbed a hold of me and he went like this with my head here and my knees here. And there was a pop. And all of a sudden he had a pin on me, and he went like this, and he got up and was all happy, hand raised and everything. He had won the match, and everybody started walking away, and all I could do was stay there on the ground staring up at the lights. And what had happened was when he went like this, it popped the two vertebrae in the lower part of my neck, and so I have an issue with my cartilage between my vertebrae to this day will swell up, and I will lose feeling down most of the right side of my body, and I have issues with touch and things like that. And I've had that ever since I was 13 years old, and so I don't think about heat the way other people do, and I apologize to you guys for why it is I always forget the welding gloves, and I will try and do better for you in the future. So yeah, that's where the whole welding thing comes from. And actually, the reason why I love this Campbell and I use it on my back bench here is because this is actually a exact model to what I started welding with when I was 14 years old. I saved up and I bought my own welder. I managed to talk my parents into going to Walmart in order to buy something. And you know, most kids when they're 14 years old, they want to go buy a bike, they want to go buy whatever. And I had bikes, I had built bikes for years. I didn't want a bike. I went to Walmart Automotive and I bought one of these, and I love them. I use it for all kinds of little jobs back here on the bench. Religiously I use it. I've got tons of welding rods stacked up next to it depending on what I'm doing. And that was a little bit of how my childhood was. One of the things that I ended up having recently happen is I got into an interview for potentially doing a Discovery Channel show. And if you've ever watched Junkyard Wars, basically Discovery Channel was looking at the idea of doing a version of Junkyard Wars here in the United States. And they actually interviewed me for it. And I got talking with the guy in order to do the interview, and there was a B-roll film that he had to do so that he could take my interview and go show it to people. And one of the things that he asked was, what makes it different the way that you do stuff? And I told him, I was like, the difference between the way I do stuff is that I grew up poor, and so I don't see things the way somebody else does. And he asked me to explain that, and my explanation to him was that everybody picks up a tennis ball and they see a tennis ball. They might elaborate on the tennis ball a little bit, and they might say, well, the tennis ball is a dog toy. The tennis ball you can use to play with your kids. Well, the thing is I don't see things that way. I see a tennis ball you could cut in half and you could make it 2 sets in order to be able to put a platform on. A tennis ball you can cut a slit in and you can use it by squeezing it in order to hold something together. A tennis ball you could use by cutting a slit in it and you could put it on the bottom of something so it doesn't scuff. A tennis ball you could cut in half and then you can screw down onto a board, and you can be able to use it as storage trays for items that are caustic and things like that. I don't see the world the way that a lot of other people do. I see it in a more something can always become something else type function, and that's because of how I grew up. I love my dad without question, and when I was growing up, we basically had just this camp. It wasn't even really a house when I was growing up. It was actually more of a camp. And the one thing that I enjoy telling people, but brings things into a major perspective, is that until I was 5 years old, we still actually had a active outhouse that was out next to the garage. And that actually never stopped being used until I was almost 8 or 9 years old. So that's one of the things that puts a perspective into how my life was. And when we were growing up, we didn't have much, and so therefore I made everything. So when I was when I was younger, I got into RC cars, or rather, I wanted to get into RC cars. But obviously, being poor, you couldn't buy the big giant RC cars that you saw in magazines and things like that. And so my mother went out and she went to every yard sale possible and she bought every single dead RC car that she possibly could and stuffed them into a big giant 40-gallon tote. And so for Christmas, I ended up with a big giant 40-gallon tote of everybody else's broken RC cars. That pretty well is a perspective of every Christmas I ever had growing up as a child. If I got something, 9 times out of 10, it probably came from a yard sale. And probably 50% of the time, it was broken. So I just grew up with everybody else's junk and making it work. And that's just kind of been the way my life has gone, is making something else out of something it wasn't supposed to be and calling it good. Everybody has a backstory, a bad time in their life, or some sort of how I got here and all that other kind of stuff that you hear about. And everybody always quotes Batman, why do we fall to learn to pick ourselves back up, or movie quotes like The Knight's Tale. Things like The Knight's Tale quote of, it's not written in the stars, we can change our stars, and things like that. And I've always been a big believer in the fact that you can make something out of nothing and it can become something. Well, when I was in my 20s, I went through a really rough time. My early 20s, I ended up losing everything, basically, in one way or another. And by the time I was done, I ended up with a really beat-to-snot escort wagon and 2 bags of clothing to my name and a couch that I slept on. And I didn't even get the couch for free. I actually paid to sleep on a couch. That's how messed up things were. And what tops it off even further is that the few things I was able to save, I ended up storing in my parents' garage, and my mother decided that she would have a yard sale and gave me part of the profits. So I went from having some stuff to having basically a really, really bad car to nothing, basically. And because I was at that really major low point, I obviously had nothing. I had no money, but I managed to nail down this job. And I managed to nail down this computer tech job. And from there, I needed to get to work. And my starter blew out. And I just couldn't get to work. There was no ifs, ands, or buts. I couldn't get a ride figured out. I couldn't get anything figured out. And I had to make it to work. And I didn't have a choice. I had to fix it. I went online, and back then was still when it was dial-up. And I went on dial-up, and I managed to get on a forum, and I managed to figure out what it is that I had to do. I went and grabbed my set of Stanley sockets, which I still to this day use in a lot of the YouTube videos. Grabbed my Stanley sockets that I got from, yet again, Walmart, and I managed to install that starter. And I got to work. And within a couple of months, I went from renting a couch to renting a room. And from renting a room, 2 or 3 months after that, I managed to make it into a small efficiency apartment. And then from there, I managed to make it into the house that you guys now see on my videos. So, in about a year and a half's time, I went from a crummy car, 2 bags of clothing, no job, renting a couch, to mortgage, 40 hours a week, and life's okay. And yet again, that goes back to the whole making something from nothing. A lot of times when you start with nothing, you learn to just add to it. You learn to pull something in and make it slightly better or slightly bigger, and then you add something else to make it slightly bigger and better. And that's what I enjoy for stories from all of you when you end up sending me these stories and talking with all of you about the different things that you do. That's part of why I love the Mudmower community. The Mudmower community is all about the idea of taking something that somebody else threw away and turning it into something that is just amazing, that does things that nobody ever thought it could do. And that's exactly what it is I enjoy. That's part of the reason why I ended up building the Ranger with the flatbed, and then I'm now started into the winch setup and the crane and everything else, was because everybody had this stereotype that Rangers were nothing better than just haul garbage to the dump and call it good. And so that's where the idea and the obsession came from, is I love taking something that is nothing and turning it into something, and having people think about it and having people want to go and do the same idea. Oh yeah, another one you guys always end up asking is, where did the Furby thing come from? Well, the Furby thing kind of is a cross between two things. Basically, when I first started doing the YouTube stuff and doing the lawn tractor stuff, I've always been decent with small engine mechanics and stuff like that, and so the lawn tractor thing just kind of eventually came around and started flipping them and stuff, and so therefore it ended up on YouTube. Well, the Furby thing came around out of the fact that when I was flipping the lawn tractors and John was really, really young, John used to ride along with me, and with him used to ride the little white Furby that you see in some of the videos, the little baby Furby. And John and the baby Furby would literally sit next to me in the pickup truck, and they would talk and they would babble, and the Furby would decide to sing and he would fall asleep. Well, later on, my friend, who also runs a YouTube channel, he sat there and he was playing around with it one day and was like, you know what, I dare you to put this into a video. And the idea just kind of stuck. I've been doing it ever since in how-to videos. Whenever it is that I happen to think of it, I set them into a location. There's actually 4 of them now, and I'm working on a 5th one potentially, if I can get the right color to blend in with some things. And it just became something. A lot of my friends ended up starting to go and tell me about how their kids actually watch my video just to go and see if they can figure out where the Furby is. So I usually start out with whatever the color Furby is, or whatever they are, in the very first part of the video, and then I try and add it in later in the video, hidden somewhere, just to go and make it fun. I was always really good at Where's Waldo growing up, and that's what it reminds me of. I enjoy the fact that the old Where's Waldo books used to go and have a storyline with them, plus finding Where's Waldo. So, another question I get asked quite often by fans and people that are around YouTube is, how much do I make on YouTube? And the problem is I'm not allowed to go and tell you that, because YouTube makes it very clear that that's against the rules. What I can tell you is that I started YouTube with the intentions of doing how-to videos, and I started YouTube with the intentions of teaching people things and things like that to make money. I'm not going to lie, I started YouTube knowing the fact that you could make money on YouTube. But you had to do it in a how-to way that people could follow and understand the system. And that's what I've done over the years. I've really worked more towards the search hits and people being able to go and find my videos when they need to fix something. I've never really worried too much about the subscriber base. It's the search hits that you make money on in YouTube. Now, with that being said, what I tell everybody when they ask me how much I make on YouTube, I tell them I make enough in order to be able to go and pay a lot of my mortgage, and that lets me live comfortably when it comes to my housing. Now, as far as whether I will ever be able to be full-time YouTube, that is majorly a goal in my life. My goal is eventually to be to the point that I can quit my primary job as a computer tech and that I can move on and be able to do YouTube full-time and give you guys content on a weekly basis, if not every 2 to 3 days. But the money's just not quite that good. On another aspect of questions that you guys ask me quite often is, how did I get into computers? And with the question of how did I get into computers, oftentimes I tell people I've been doing computers basically since I was about 14, 15 years old. And I'm 34 at the shooting of this video. Now, my father was a computer technician for the high school in the school district that I grew up in. And back then they didn't call it IT. They called it technical administrator. And he would end up bringing home the electronics and the computers of the time. And as stuff would phase out, he'd end up with old stuff that needed to be fixed, needed to be worked on, needed some monkeying, needed to be reformatted, needed whatever. And I just got into it. I started fixing them when I was really young. One of my dad's more unpleasant stories that he likes to go and tell people is that I'm not allowed to go and have orange soda around a computer. And that's because one of the first computers that ever had to be fully rebuilt around me was a Commodore 64 that I was drinking orange soda while I had the flu. And it just kind of came up, went everywhere into the keyboard, and the whole thing had to be rebuilt. That's also my story about the first computer I ever killed. But is what it is. So I ended up in computers because of that, because yet again, it was the ability to have something that was dead, non-functional, and get it up and running, which is what it is I really enjoy doing in life. And if you enjoy that, you really should go and pursue it. In some way you can make money off of it, and in some way you can continue with it. That being said, I used to have an English teacher. I am horrible at English. Anybody who's ever seen my posts, anybody who's ever seen any of my write-ups and stuff like that, English is not a good language for me. I speak computer, I speak ones and zeros, I speak technical documents, and I can speak engines and everything else, and I understand and can hear them. I'm not good with English. And so I had this amazing, amazing English teacher back when I was in high school. And I really think the only reason she passed me was because of the fact I could always fix her VCR. No joke. I honestly think the only reason she ever gave me a passing grade was because of the fact every time her VCR broke, I fixed it. But she pulled me aside one day, and she had me for English when I was a freshman. And when I was a senior, she pulled me aside and she said, "Neil, English is not your language. But when you do find a language that you do speak, and you speak it well, that is what you're going to make a career out of." I've never forgotten that, and I've thought about it every day of my life ever since. And that's where the computer tech thing came from. I speak ones and zeros really, really well. On the other hand, I'm not very good with people skills. But because I speak ones and zeros really well, I'm really good at giving step-by-step, this is how you do stuff, directions, because I don't tend to see gray area. I tend to see very black and white, this is how it's done, here's what you do, and no babble in between. So that's how I ended up doing the YouTube how-tos, and I got into doing the research, and I enjoy that side of it, and I enjoy teaching it to people. And one of the things being a computer tech has taught me over the years is how to take something extremely technical and how to turn it into something that I just click and it happens can understand. And that's why I enjoy YouTube. YouTube allows everybody of different capabilities to pass things on in order to learn technical ideas, technical methods, and stuff like that. And how many times I love when I get a comment from somebody about how they were able to save themselves hundreds of dollars because they were able to replace the belt themselves, or they were able to figure out what pulley went wrong, or things like that. And that's the real awesome thing about YouTube, is when you get those comments that motivate you to continue doing better. Another question I get a lot is, what did I start YouTube with? Because a lot of people seem to think you have to have some major GoPro and you have to have all this major editing software and all these other kinds of things. And you don't. You don't have to have all of that. You do in order to produce videos that are really, really majorly high quality, and to see like insane, awesome skater park tricks and stuff like that. But when it comes to an actual how-to video, it doesn't have to be that intense of a video camera. I actually started off my YouTube channel with a $35 Vivitar that I actually borrowed the money to be able to purchase. My original tripod that I bought, by the way, if you're going to do YouTube videos, buy a tripod. It doesn't matter if you have a $5 camera or you have a $500 camera. If it's nothing but shaky, 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 nobody's going to watch it. That's my big thing to tell everybody. So I bought my tripod at Goodwill. Goodwill is one of these stores where people drop off stuff and they mark it up in order to go and make more profit than it's actually worth. But that's another story. So I ended up buying the tripod, and my first how-to video that I ever made that did really well was actually a fish filter how-to. And my fish filter how-to video, I shot that night. I was working on doing the filter, and people kept asking me questions about the filter on monsterfishkeepers.com, which is another place I really got my start in. And I eventually just said, you know what? So many people are asking for this that I went in and I shot the video. I was in horrible grungy pants. I was in a shirt that looked as if I had just come off of the assembly line at the most grungy restaurant you have ever been to. But I shot that video, I edited it up, and I threw it on Monster Fish Keepers in order to go and answer the question that everybody kept asking over and over again. And all of a sudden, I went from 2 or 3 views, you know, it was cool to post up a few videos of the fish, to I had this one video that all of a sudden had 20,000 views, and that's where the YouTube addiction came from, and that's where I really got into the idea of hunting for what is this thing that people don't seem to apparently understand, that everybody seems to think is simple that I talk to, but yet these people need help. And that's how I ended up really growing the channel, was I kept looking for things I could do how-tos on that seemed simple to me that I could break down into ones and zeros, and that's how the channel grew. I just want to end this video with telling you all that I can't even begin to thank all of you enough for the amount that my life has changed due to you and everything that you have done for me. The amazing things that my family gets to do because of working with YouTube. The amazing builds that I'm able to do because of YouTube. The people that I have been able to meet. The amazing individuals that I get to send emails with and that I get to message with on Facebook and that I get to work with on their YouTube channel also and that I get to help out with are just awesome. Just the change in how positive everything in YouTube has made my life, I could not do without you. And I want you all to know that this channel is going to keep growing. We're going to keep doing bigger and better builds, but we're always going to keep to the fact that we started from nothing and that we will build up to something really great and really grand. Thank you, everybody, for supporting me and my family. Have a good day.